Good morning and welcome to today's mission status briefing. Joining us today are Derek Hossman, the International Space Station Lead Flight Director, and Alison Bollinger, the mission's Lead Spacewalk Officer. Derek?
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here after a very successful EVA number 4, of course, the last planned spacewalk for the docked mission. And also the last spacewalk conducted by a space shuttle crew on the station. Again, very successful EVA, and just a tribute to all the work and preparation that goes into these spacewalks, both by the team on the ground and as well as by the crew on orbit. This was another particularly challenging EVA in that it had the choreography involved with handing the OBSS off to the spacewalking crew. So we had Box Johnson inside the space station, piloting the space station robotic arm, maneuvering the boom to a place where Mike Fink and Greg Shamdoff could grab it and install it on S1. All that went extremely well. Another difference from the pre-flight plan in terms of the SSRMS choreography today is that initially we had planned to use Katie Coleman as the M2, or the second set of eyes on the robotic workstation inside the space station. Of course, when the mission slipped and with Katie having returned to Earth, we depended on our robotics officer in mission control to be the M2, or the second set eyes. So you might have noticed some additional discussions on the space-to-ground 2 loop between Box on the station and Capcom in mission control. And that's because our robotics officer in mission control was serving as that second set of eyes. It's something we've done before, but it's a little bit unique for a docked mission, and that went extremely well. We did some of the early tasks in the spacewalk lasted a little longer than expected, and what we did was we made some adjustments in the middle of the timeline, which Alison's going to talk to you about, in order to get some critical objectives toward the end. But at the end, you saw that we were able to had a great opportunity with Greg Shamatoff on ELC-3, looking back on the station in the daylight pass, and just I thought a wonderful way to end what was a series of very successful spacewalks. And of course, inside the space station, things didn't slow down. Roberto Vittori and Box Johnson, when he wasn't operating the robotic arm, continued to do transfer. And we also were working on ATV stowage. So we kept the other crew members not involved in the spacewalk busy inside. And looking ahead, before I hand over to Alison, tomorrow we're not slowing down. We finished up the work on the carbon dioxide removal assembly and additional transfer and stowage. And then finally, the day after that, on flight day 14, I lose track on these long missions, but on flight day 14, finally we'll conclude that day with hatch close. But you know, it's a little bit of a bittersweet moment for the team that kind of pours their lives and all their focus over a number of years into this series of EVAs. And before we came over here, we had a great tag up with the crew. And it was just nice to talk to them about everything we've accomplished and just how well everything has gone. So with that, I'll hand over to Alison for the details of today's spacewalk.
All right, thanks a lot, Derek. And like Derek mentioned, I couldn't be more proud of how this mission has run its course through our 4 EVAs and how EVA 4 today went. So we had a 7-hour and 24-minute EVA to conclude the mission. As Derek mentioned as well, we started out the EVA with working with Box, who was flying the arm to stow the boom on the S1 truss. We started out with Spanky had a tool bag that contained an adapter assembly that we would use later in the EVA, and Greg worked on retrieving an APFR, or foot restraint, articulated portable foot restraint, that he installed up on the S1 truss. As we got out to the work site, the arm was a little bit behind us, so we thought we required the crew members to wait for the arm, but it turns out that it actually took Taz a little bit longer to ingress the foot restraint than it nominally took in the neutral buoyancy lab when we were training this. And post EVA, he mentioned when the crew nominally reports the suit fit issues, that he thinks his legs might have been about a ½ inch too long in his suit, and that was what was causing difficulty with ingressing the foot restraint, because he wasn't able to get his heel all the way down in the boot. And this is common. We've seen this before. We typically we typically protect for a certain amount of spinal growth on crew members in microgravity. So we had adjusted Taz's suit to what we thought would be his spinal growth on orbit. And it turns out, I guess he didn't grow as much as we thought he would. So his legs were a little bit long. But he was able to eventually, with the help of Spanky, ingress that foot restraint at just the right time that Box was ready to present the boom. So the 2 EVA crew members worked with Box to move the boom back in. And then the 2 crew members took control of the boom, stowed it using the on-orbit stowage equipment, OSEs, or the gun rack. You might have heard Box refer to it as. They stowed it on the gun rack, locked it into place, released some constraints that would allow for thermal expansion of those joints if required. And then Greg worked on transferring the foot restraint from the truss over to the arm, which he would use later. And Spanky worked on releasing some connectors on the sensor end of the boom. Since those would no longer be used, we installed some grounding connectors in that place. Once we were complete at the boom stow worksite, both crew members headed outboard to P6 to retrieve the power and data grapple fixture PDGF that we eventually installed on the boom. While we were out there working on releasing the PDGF, as Derek mentioned, we started calculating, looking at the numbers here on the ground and realizing that the first few tasks took a little bit longer than we had planned pre-flight, so we made a real-time call there. The plan was for Spanky to take the PDGF back and Taz to take the foot restraint back to a more central location on station. We made a real-time call to just go ahead and leave that foot restraint out on P6 for a future crew to retrieve, so that did save us some time to help us catch back up on the timeline. Once we were back on the S0 truss, Taz worked with Box to ingress the foot restraint that he had previously installed on the arm, and then he flew over to where Spanky was waiting with the PDGF, and they performed that transfer. And then the 2 crew members worked together to release the EFGF, or the current grapple fixture that was on the boom. They worked on releasing that EFGF, and that included cutting the wires that actually provided the power to the sensors. Once the EFGF was removed, Spanky stowed that inside a tool bag, and then he retrieved the PDGF adapter assembly, which was presented a mounting ring for the PDGF. So they installed the 6 bolts that held that PAA in place. Then they worked together to install the PDGF and its 4 expandable diameter fasteners, or EDFs, that held that in place. Once we were complete with installing the PDGF on the boom, it was at a point in time when we started having more discussions about the best way to ensure that we accomplished the high priority release of the fasteners on Dexter's spare arm out on ELC3 at the end of the EVA. So we had some discussions and realized Spanky's next step was to transfer the grapple fixture we had removed from the bag to the tool stowage assembly, or the toolbox that's in the shuttle payload bay. And we realized it's better to just save that 35 minutes and plan on bringing that grapple fixture inside, and it can either return internally on STS-134 or possibly in the MPLM on STS-135. So we gave the crew a heads up that we were just going to defer Spanky from heading down to the payload bay and have him just translate straight out to ELC3 to start the preparations for releasing those fasteners on Dexter's arm. So meanwhile, Greg worked on cleaning up the arm, which included removing the foot restraint from the arm, stowing it on a CETA cart, and also removing the adapter that allows the APFR to install in the SSRMS. So while he was working on that, we also gave Taz a heads up that we'd like him to perform an oxygen recharge of his tanks just to make sure that he had the most capacity left to perform a full-length EVA, because we knew it would be a little bit longer than 6:30 on today, so we went ahead and had him do that O2 recharge. So Spanky made his way out to ELC3, got set up to release these 3 fasteners. We expected the first of 3 fasteners to release with no issues, and then we were planning on using this specially designed pry rod to release the 2 remaining fasteners, and these were based on thermal issues that we had seen when we were first assembling Dexter on STS-123. Spanky got out there, released the first fastener, no issue, went over to, we thought, just untorque the second fastener and then wait for Taz to come out and help him with the pry rod. And then Spanky reported that fastener released with no issues, so then we gave him the go ahead and release the third fastener, the third and final fastener on Dexter's spare arm. Spanky was able to release the fastener and got it pulled about halfway out of its install location, and then he encountered some resistance. So he ended up single-handedly doing a 2-man job, which for Spanky, that's expected. That's how he always is. So he was able to simultaneously use the pry rod and also release that fastener while Taz was still cleaning up the arm and performing his O2 recharge. So while we were nearing the end of the EVA, Spanky still had some cleanup work to do. Taz had with him a special camera with a fisheye lens that he was very excited to be able to take some fabulous photos out on the end of ELC3. So since Taz still had some time available while Spanky was cleaning up the work site, we had a get ahead on our list to take some photos of the STPH3 experiment, which launched on ELC3. So we sent Taz out to go ahead and snap those photos of that experiment, and then also to take what we're sure are going to be some phenomenal photos of Endeavour docked to the space station for the last time. So once the 2 crew members were complete at ELC3, they took just a few minutes to soak in the sights, and all in MCC, we all appreciated that because we had WVS footage at the time, so we were also able to take just a few seconds and realize how major of a milestone this was. We packed it up, called it a day, headed back to the airlock, and completed, like I said, a 7-hour and 24-minute EVA, and we closed the hatch for the last time with shuttle astronauts. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Derek. We'll take questions now, starting here in Houston. Would you please step to the microphone when you're recognized, and please remember to give your name and affiliation. Robert?
Hi, Rob Perlman with CollectSpace.com. There was a question, I guess, after they got into the airlock that something might have floated away from Mike Fink. Was that verified, or do you know what it was?
Yeah, we were able to. So we had some folks watching video in the back room who had said, we noticed something floating away from the crew members. So while we were still out EVA, we had Spanky verify that he had all the appropriate tethers on his mini workstation and on his body restraint tether. He reported he did. So as we started looking at the footage a little bit closer, we believe it was a label. There were the labels on the truss element, so it was more than likely one of those labels that came loose. Thanks.
And I know that it was mentioned that it's a bittersweet milestone, but is the EVA team, the shuttle EVA team as a group, marking this milestone in any way here on the ground? Are you getting together and toasting your success?
We haven't thought about that yet, but I'm sure we will be. Like we've talked about before, our EVA team, we do both shuttle and station. So while we're complete with shuttle-based EVAs, there are going to continue to be station EVAs over the next however many years that station is up there. So we're going to continue to be a very busy group. But I haven't heard anything about a party just yet. We'll be sure to invite you if we have one.
Yes.
Denise Chow at Space.com. I was wondering if you could summarize some of the get-ahead tasks that you didn't get a chance to get to today, and how those will fit in with the whether they'll be moved to the EVA plan during the 135 mission by the station astronauts.
Okay, and I guess the one thing I forgot to mention, we did get another task done. We got the inspection and recinch of a tether that was holding down the OTP that we had released from Dexter previously. So that was another task that we got done. The only planned task that we did not complete was the installation of that 1553 data cable for the FGB PDGF. That's perfectly suited for an increment EVA. We have one next summer. I'm not sure if they're looking at putting that task on there. As far as the other get-aheads, I can't really think of any other get-aheads that are required. They were more nice to have. We did have a task scheduled to restow tools in a toolbox out external to the airlock, and that was just to help with the internal stowage. But we can just continue to keep those tools stowed in the airlock.
And then just as a follow-up, I was wondering if you could characterize how the 4 EVAs went for you this mission. It seemed to be very smooth other than a few minor hiccups. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I like I said on the first EVA, I was just grinning from ear to ear because it was executing my first EVA in the front room, and it was just extremely exciting, and everything went so well, and we were able to. We had a few hiccups on the first EVA, not being able to complete that lab EWC task, but then we were able to pretty seamlessly fit that into EVA 3 since it was a higher priority task than the 1553 cable. So overall, I couldn't be more proud of the way that both the on-orbit crew and the ground team handled these 4 EVAs. It just shows how well that our training went and how well the team was able to adapt to real-time changes, and they're able to just, like water off a duck's back. We were swapping tasks around on today's EVA, and it was like no big deal. The crew had trained this all. So I was extremely pleased with the way that the EVAs went today and overall on the mission.
Any further questions here in Houston? I believe we have reporters on the phone bridge. We'll take those now, starting with Phil.
This is Philip Foss with NASASpaceflight.com. You guys already covered everything for me. Thanks.
Okay. Marcia?
Yes, hi. I was just hoping that Derek could talk a little bit about Space Station Complete. I know there was a lot of different history points today, but it seems like the overriding comments involved the completion of the space station construction. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, you might have heard Commander Mark Kelly call down assembly complete when we finished the OBSS install on the S1 truss, which was not a call I was expecting, by the way, but when you take a step back and look at it in terms of the U.S. segment, that was and is the final piece in terms of significant additions to the station. So, looking back, I've talked a little bit about my history with the program and the fact that I started back on prior to STS-88. So, I never would have thought that I would still be here today necessarily, but having participated in the first mission that delivered the first U.S. piece of the space station, to have participated in this next to last mission with the last significant piece of hardware is just an honor and a privilege for me. And the best thing about these missions is the people and the teamwork that goes into it. And that's I mentioned that it's bittersweet, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but that's. In terms of this mission, that's what I'll look back on the most, just the great people that I worked with and the wonderful crew that we had to go execute.
And just refresh my memory, the Russians have at least one more module to launch. What are their plans going forward, and when might they be launching their final pieces?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the specific schedule, but I know in the next couple of years they plan to replace their Piers docking module with a larger and more complex module.
Thank you very much.
Bill Harwood?
Yeah, hi. Just a quick nuts and bolts question for Allison. And this probably got resolved earlier, and I just simply missed it in the fog of staying up all night during this mission. But they mentioned on one of the flight director updates some kind of FOD issue with the PDGF you guys put on the FGP. I just wanted to know how that got resolved. Thanks.
Well, Drew took some very good photos up close and personal on that PDGF, and we think we were able to identify it as a grounding wire. I think that maybe holds the multi-layer insulation around the outside of the PDGF, and that grounding wire was protruding from one of the flapper doors where when the SSRMS grapples, the electrical connectors go through those flapper doors. So we're still not sure how we're actually going to resolve that issue. So there is still a future EVA to at least install the 1553 data cable as well as address the FOD issue in the PDGF.
Okay, Bill, is that all from you?
Thank you very much.
And do we have additional questions here in Houston? Robert?
Just working off that question, Rob Perlman with CollectSpace.com again. I remember there was a lot of work done on qualifying the OBSS for use with an astronaut in the end. I think Piers Sellers got out on the end of it. With the new PDGF at its new location, is it already cleared to have an astronaut put at the end if you needed to, or is more work needed?
Well, I believe it's already cleared. So it would grapple, the SSRMS would grapple at that end where we installed the power and data grapple fixture. And then at the opposite end of the boom where the sensors are, we have both a worksite interface or a WIF that we can directly install a station foot restraint into. And also on the underside, we have a grapple bar that we could install a pad or PFR attachment device to the bottom of. So we have options, and then from there we could also install an articulating portable foot restraint from there. So we do have options on either side at the end of the boom to install, to be able to have an astronaut out on the end of the boom.
And do we have additional questions here in Houston? Well, seeing none, we'll conclude our briefing now. You can follow activities of the STS-134 mission of Endeavour and International Space Station activities at www.nasa.gov. Thank you for coming.